Welcome to Dark Knight Films Reviews and another special ranking night. Tonight, we will be counting down our picks for the top 10 Hammer directors. Now for this list, we will only be listing those who have had 3 or more films that they have directed for the company. So no single directors, where he just made an appearance one time and then that was it. So, without further ado, let's get on with this list. Coming in at number 10, we have Alan Gibson. Alan Gibson was born April 28, 1938, and is a Canadian director who directed many British film and television shows. But he's mostly known for us Hammer fans for directing Crescendo in 1970, Dracula AD 1972 and 1972, and The Satanic Rites of Dracula in 1973. Now, those 3 films alone, just having the last 2 kind of tarnishing his credits, you would think, why is he on this list? But he also directed 2 episodes of the 1980 television series Hammer House of Horror. He directed the episode entitled The Silent Scream, which starred Peter Cushing and Brian Cox, and he directed the episode The Two Faces of Evil, starring Gary Raymond and Ann Calder Marshall. So, with those additional credits to his name, and Crescendo itself being such a great film, Alan Gibson earned his place on this list, in our opinion. Alan Gibson died on July 5th, 1987 in London, UK. Coming in at number 9, we have Seth Holt. Seth Holt was born July 21st, 1923, and was a Palestinian-born British film director, producer, and editor. He began directing in 1958, but it wasn't until 1961 that he directed his first Hammer film, Taste of Fear. Followed that with The Nanny in 1965, and before his untimely death at the young age of 47 on February 14th, 1971, he was in the midst of directing Blood from the Mummy's Tomb, which he had a heart attack, unfortunately, 5 weeks into a 6-week shoot. Had Holt not died so young, he'd probably be higher on this list, because almost every film he did was well done. And coming in at number 8, we have Peter Szostak. Peter Szostak was born May 27th, 1935, in Budapest, Hungary, and is a British film and television director. Us Hammer fans know him for directing Taste the Blood of Dracula, 1970, Countess Dracula, 1971, and Hands of the Ripper in 1971. He also directed 3 episodes of the Hammer House of Horror 1980s television series. He directed the episodes The 13th Reunion, starring Michael Latimer and Julia Foster, The Rude Awakening, starring Denholm Elliott and Lucy Guttridge, and Visitor from the Grave, starring Catherine Lee Scott and Simon McCorkin. As of this video, Peter Szostak is still with us at the age of 89. Coming in at number 7, we have Michael Carreras. Michael Henry Carreras was born December 21st, 1927, and was a British film producer and director. He's known mostly for his association with Hammer Films because he was the son of founder James Carreras. He produced over 60 films with the company, including Curse of Frankenstein, 1957, Horror of Dracula, 1958, Curse of the Werewolf, 1960, and She, 1965. But we're here for his directing, and he directed such films as Maniac in 1963, The Curse of the Mummy's Tomb in 1964, Prehistoric Women, 1967, The Lost Continent, 1968, and Shatter, 1975. In 1971, he also took over directing Blood from the Mummy's Tomb after the unfortunate death of Seth Holt. Carreras himself died of cancer in London on April 19, 1994. Coming in at number 6, we have Jimmy Sangster. Jimmy Henry Kinmel Sangster was born December 2nd, 1927, and was a British screenwriter and director. He originally worked as a production assistant at Hammer Films, as well as being an assistant director, second unit director, and a production manager. He wrote several films for the company, including Curse of Frankenstein, 1957, and Horror of Dracula, 1958. But we're here to talk about his turns at directing. And those films began in 1970 with directing The Horror of Frankenstein, which he was also a producer and co-writer on. 1971, he directed Lust for a Vampire, and in 1972, he directed Fear on the Night, which, again, he was also a producer and the writer. Sangster died in his home in Kensington, London, on August 19, 2011, at the age of 83. And coming in at number 5, we have Don Sharp. Born Donald Herman Sharp on April 19, 1921, Sharp was an Australian film director. The first film he directed with Hammer was The Kiss of the Vampire in 1965. He followed that with The Devil Ship Pirates in 1964. And then he directed Rasputin the Mad Monk in 1966. But he also directed one of the more famous of the episodes of the Hammer House of Horror from 1980, called The Guardians of the Abyss, which starred Ray Lonan and Barbara Ewing. And on the other side of the spectrum, away from Hammer, he directed 2 Fu Manchu movies, The Face of Fu Manchu in 1965 and The Brides of Fu Manchu in 1966. Don Sharp died on December 14, 2011, after a short spell in the hospital. He was 90 years old. And coming in at number 4, we have Roy Ward Baker. Born Roy Horace Baker on December 19, 1916, he was an English film director. He was known professionally as Roy Baker until 1967 when he adopted Roy Ward Baker as his screen credit. For Hammer, Roy Ward Baker directed Quatermass in the Pit, 1967, The Anniversary, 1968, The Vampire Lovers, 1970, Scars of Dracula, 1970, Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde, 1971, and he was the co-director on The Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires in 1974. Roy Ward Baker died on October 5th, 2010, at the age of 93. And coming in at number 3, we have John Gilling. Born May 29, 1912, he was an English film director and screenwriter. He wrote and directed several Hammer films, including The Shadow of the Cat, 1961, Pirates of Blood River, 1962, The Scarlet Blade, 1964, The Brigand of Kandahar, 1965, Plague of the Zombies, 1966, The Reptile, 1966, and The Mummy Shroud, 1967. John Gilling died on November 22, 1984, in Madrid, Spain, at the age of 72. Coming in at number 2, we have Freddy Francis. Born Frederick William Francis on December 22, 1917, Francis was an English cinematographer and film director whose filmmaking career spanned over 60 years, from the late 1930s until the late 2000s. He was one of the most celebrated British cinematographers of his time, but for this list we are focusing on the films that he directed for Hammer, which included Paranoia, 1963, The Evil of Frankenstein, 1964, Hysteria, 1965, and Dracula Has Risen from the Grave in 1968. He also directed several films for Amicus Films as well, such as Dr. Terror's House of Horrors, 1965, The Skull, 1965, Torture Garden, 1967, and Tales from the Crypt in 1972. He won 2 Academy Awards for cinematography, one in 1960 for Sons and Lovers, and one in 1989 for Glory. Francis died on March 17, 2007, as a result of lingering effects from a stroke at the age of 89. And coming in at number 1, it has to be Terrence Fischer. Born February 23rd, 1904, Fischer was a British film director and editor. He directed quite a few films for Hammer, including Mantrap, 1953, The Curse of Frankenstein, 1957, Horror of Dracula, 1958, Revenge of Frankenstein, 1958, The Hound of the Baskervilles, 1959, The Mummy, 1959, The Man Who Could Cheat Death, 1959, The Stranglers of Bombay, 1959, The Two Faces of Dr. Jekyll, 1960, The Brides of Dracula, 1960, Sword of Sherwood Forest, 1960, The Curse of the Werewolf, 1961, A Phantom of the Opera, 1962, The Gorgon, 1964, Dracula, Prince of Darkness, 1966, Frankenstein Created Woman, 1967, The Devil Rides Out, 1968, Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed, 1969, and Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell, 1974. After several years in retirement, Terrence Fischer died on June 18, 1980, in Twickenham, London, England, at the age of 76. But we will all always remember him as one of the greatest Hammer directors of all time. So what do you think of this list? Do you agree with our list? Do you disagree? Let us know in the comments down below. And as usual, if you enjoyed this ranking, do not forget to like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget to click that bell icon so you can be notified about future videos just like this one. And while you're by the subscribe button, click that join button and become a Dark Knight fan. And if you missed last week's ranking video, check out the link above. And if you missed any of our other ranking videos, check out this playlist and get caught up.